Self-employed? All of you. Okay. How many of you are researchers? Okay. Who has an interest in medtech? All right. Ag tech? Agriculture. Ag tech?
Yeah.
Edutech? Financial services? Space? And I put aerospace with that as well. Defense industries, or anything to do with defense. Cybersecurity. Creative industries. All right. Public sector. Government. Have I missed any sectors? Advanced manufacturers. Yeah.
Oil and gas and energy. One of the,
Oil and gas. All right, great.
Well, energy.
Okay, so I might just start with you, David, and then I'll also go to you, Carol. I just want to get an understanding for the audience about your journey through, when you left either university or studies to where you've come today, and in particular, if you could talk a little bit about, the organisation you represent, and just give a flavour of the things that you're doing that are same for you, Carol. I'll start with you, David.
Thanks. Hi everyone, my name's David Burt. I'm the guy with the sore throat, so if you can't hear me, please come forward. Started my career in financial services as an accountant, working for KPMG, then worked for Morgan Stanley, and really sort of had those foundational business sort of concepts of sort of how big organizations make investment decisions. Kind of got tired of making money for people I didn't like, so I wanted to do something more meaningful with my life, and so I joined CSIRO as part of their corporate strategy team. And that was part of the organisation that helps the CSIRO make investment decisions around science, so how to spend their money on science. And as part of that, started to really encourage CSIRO to think about ways that it could more in a bottom-up sense make investment decisions when it came to science and technology. They had a fairly good top-down process, but we were looking at some of the things that are happening in the lean startup movement, especially what Steve Blank was doing with the NSF in the United States. That was doing more project-level research team activities to do investment prioritisation, and so that's really what I and a couple other people inside of CSIRO got quite interested in. And as a result of that, we then started the ON program, which is now morphed into a sort of a multi-stage program of empowering project-level researchers and scientists to understand the pathway impact for their technology, which is a fancy way of saying how does new science and new knowledge get turned into technologies which can then be adopted into products and services that people can use in their lives, either professionally or personally. And so think about my context as someone who's gone through financial services, investment decision making in a very corporate context, brought that to the science world, and is now using some of the startup business model design principles to help project level research teams gather the evidence to support attracting resources to what we're trying to do.
Okay.
So I started my life out of university as a pharmacist and decided there were too many little models. So I joined a drug company and sold drugs for a couple of years and really enjoyed the sales and marketing side of it. And, I sold drugs for a pharmaceutical company, and decided I needed to do an MBA. I was fortunate enough to get into a program over at Berkeley in the US, and after that I went and worked in Silicon Valley for a number of startups, about 3 or 4 different startups, and eventually came back to Australia, the Poole family. But was surprised here that we have this, as John was saying, we have this fabulous research, and for whatever reason we don't commercialise it. We don't ask. We look to throw it over the pond, find someone who's going to license it from us. So I've been passionate about trying to help Australians, commercialise their great research and take it further down rather than just throw it to some big company to buy us out. And I think we're getting there with the CSIRO program, the accelerator programs that are around. We haven't defined accelerator versus incubator yet. So I was at a Berkeley reunion about 10 years ago and saw 10 years ago, maybe 5.5, the whole business model canvas, the whole idea that David's talking which was essentially getting everybody involved in the startup, the researcher and the sales and marketing people talking to customers all the time, but getting the researchers, the technical people, to go out into the field and hear what the customer has to say. And hopefully we're getting that going slowly here. That's really my background, and then a few of us from the medtech field had been doing this enterprise workshop, which was sort of an old-fashioned way of doing what the business model canvas does now, and decided that we'd like to start a medtech owned incubator. So we have an incubator based at CSIRO in the advanced manufacturing building at West Linfield. So the reason the company's called Fledge Innovation Labs. We call our incubatees fledglings, which they don't seem to object to. And we've got the whole of CSIRO not our disposal. We have to. They've been very generous to us. They've got
to the front door.
Yeah, that's right. And so what I enjoy doing is just wandering the hallways and finding out what technologies are there for medtech. There's all sorts of cool stuff that it shouldn't be as much of a secret as it is. So our fledglings benefit from being in CSIRO. We have some of them who are tenants both of CSIRO and of us, so they come to us for the business and the guidance. So we use the business model canvas and all of our expertise in our 90 plus mentors that we have from the medtech industry to help our companies understand who their customer is, go through the grant process. That seems to be, we spend a lot of time helping them write government grants so that they can get them. So enough.
All right, so the next question is a bit of a two-pronged question. One is that people sometimes tend to have not a very clear understanding around the difference between an accelerator and an incubator. So in your answer, I'd like you to define what is the difference between the two from your perspective. And the other question that if you could then weave the answer into it is around that if you look at the strict and a limited amount of people that can get into accelerators and into incubators, and if you look at the very small success rate of companies, maybe between 1% and 2% actually become successful, recognizing Airbnb, Reddit, and Dropbox are part of that. Are we overblowing the benefits and the need for incubators and accelerators? So I'd like you to hopefully explain to me the difference between the two and why are accelerators and incubators worth it if you look at the small number of people that go through them and the even smaller amount of people or businesses that are actually successful.
My definition of accelerators are the sorts of programs that CSIRO runs, and there's a number of them around. I would probably argue that there are enough programs. And it's really learning the methodology of going back to, you're looking at the whole business and going and talking to the customers first, rather than developing a gorgeous piece of technology that then you go and see who will buy it. So I think that really educating the researchers, the technologists on how to adapt their technology. So that's the education that I would say is the accelerator side. And some companies do both the acceleration and the incubation. We're an incubator, so we have fledglings, we have our incubatee companies who are there day to day, and we help them with all sorts of different questions. There are countries around the world that have got a more sophisticated incubation system. We're sort of just, we're doing it privately. In Israel, they have 30 odd incubators government funded. They started because after the Soviet Union disbanded, there were a whole lot of Russian Jews who didn't speak Hebrew but were really clever. So that's how they're started. And when I was visiting a few years ago, I noticed that 50% of them are medtech, whereas we had at that stage no medtech. So that's why we started Fledge, and we're still pretty young. We're a couple of years old. We're fortunate to be in the CSIRO building. I explained why that was. And we are there for the long term for our fledglings. We expect them to be there for probably 2 years and then go into VC funding, angel funding, Series A, B, and head off.
So in terms of what the difference is between an incubator and an accelerator, I'd encourage people to think about, well, at least the way I think about accelerators are supposed to take you from a defined point A to a defined point B. most of the accelerators in Australia, and not the one I run, but most of the accelerators in Australia are focused on taking you from not having raised a significant amount of capital to getting you to a funding event. So if you look at the Slingshots, the Blue Chilies, the Merides of the world, they very clearly target people who haven't raised a significant amount of money. They take them through a 2 to 4 month program with the whole point of going through that motion is to raise a 6-figure seed investment round at the end of it. From my accelerator at Cyro, what we do is we work with research teams and try to get them from a defined point of I am an employee of a research institute or a university, and my IP is owned by that university, so that's where they start, and by the end we try and get to the point where if there's enough of an opportunity, they've got their IP out of the university into a company, and they themselves have either made the decision to join that company, to leave the research institute, or they've been able to attract somebody who is willing to do that. So the reason we call ours an accelerator is because we're trying to take something that usually takes 24 months or never and compress that down to a three month time period. So we're trying to take people from a defined A to B point. I classify other like incubators as more product focused. They take a team and they try to sort of help them find their way over a much longer period of time. And so it's less about going from A to B as fast as possible as it is about, as you're a formative company, you're going to need lots of different sorts of help and advice along the way. And I would classify incubators as places where you can go that can help you understand what you need to know when you need to know it, and that's going to change depending on the context of your business and what's happening. So I encourage, if you're thinking about doing an accelerator or an incubator, if it's a 3-month program, unless you have a very clear expectation of I'm starting here and I'm going to finish here, maybe don't do that program. And if you think you need some more like longer term hand holding, especially around product, because you can't time-bound product development. It doesn't work that way. Even in software, it doesn't work that way. So if it's much more around you need product advice, I'd look to the things that call themselves incubators. But again, people can call their programs whatever they want. Some things are called incubators that I'd say are more accelerators, and vice versa. So just that's the way I think about the world.
But it's also good if the incubator uses similar techniques that you're teaching in the acceleration.
Oh, definitely.
And I think the business model canvas tends to be pretty generic across both areas. So.
So can I ask you then, what are the common mistakes that you see time and time again with people that come into you, either an accelerator or an incubator? What are the common mistakes that maybe these guys would like to understand that they don't make when they decide to go into either an accelerator or an incubator? I must start with you, or you, Carol?
Well, I would advise people to do an accelerator even if it's an online free one initially, because what we see is, and it happens in tech companies, that there's too much focus on the product or the technology rather than who's going to pay for it, the customer.
So if you're thinking about applying to one of these programs, there's a couple of common mistakes I see people make. One, people don't ask, why does this program exist? So who's funding it and why? So you can kind of, some accelerators and incubators run for financial profit. So there's people who run these programs, they put up their own money, and they have some sort of a financial model where they get value from putting teams to the program. Other programs exist because they have a patron. That could be the federal government, that could be the state government, that could be a corporation. Like, why does Telstra fund Merides? No one's been able to give me a good answer to that yet, but it is a good program. But largely they exist because Telstra funds them. There are some other ones, Blue Chili, Slingshot. Some of the Slingshot programs have a corporate patron, like HCF Catalyst. Blue Chili model runs both. They have their own programs and they have some of their programs on behalf of corporates. They're all good programs, but really the first mistake I see people make is they don't actually ask the question, who's bankrolling this program and why? Because unless your goals as a new business line up very well with the people who are actually funding that model, you're not going to have a good time. So that's the first mistake I see people make. second one is when they're going into those programs and they're applying, people don't understand that everything's negotiable. And so if you're applying to that program and they put a term sheet down in front of you that says, cool, we want to accept you into this program, here are the terms of entry, especially if they're taking equity, most people just sign that. They don't realise that everything's negotiable, and it's not something that these sort of programs advertise, but I'm aware of many very high potential companies who've been able to negotiate more generous terms coming into these programs.
You do that. That's a question that I've been doing for a lot of the people investing their time in startups. How you do that? How you negotiate when you are the one who needs the money really? Because yeah, the other person is like, I'm giving you my money, so for that reason I should get more than you.
Yeah.
So how do you manage that part? Even if all the process of creation comes through your mind.
Yeah.
So
So the question was sort of how do you negotiate, and the best way to negotiate is have a plan B that you're comfortable with. So you not being desperate will put you in a strong negotiating position. And so if you're considering doing, if you look at your business and say I need to go through an accelerator to get me to point A to B, then look out what are all the accelerators that can take me from A to B. See if sometimes the application windows won't line up, but to the extent that you can create alternative options for yourself, that gives you a stronger negotiating position. Because I can guarantee you most of the accelerators and incubators in Australia are struggling for deal flow. They're struggling to get good people applying. They get plenty of applications, but in terms of applications they actually really want to take into their program, it's quite hard.
But you'd argue that's a problem with, it doesn't matter what
Speak
you
up.
do.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. That's a problem with everything. The vast majority of people who apply for any of this stuff are exactly the people who don't want to do it. The old adage that anyone who wants power disqualifies themselves because they don't do it. It's the same deal. And it's one of the hard bits is actually finding. Well, you coming from Cyro. I've got a world-class designer of medical widgets. Why does he or she care about term sheets? Yeah, it just doesn't. So a really hard bit is finding, especially in technical, people who actually just don't like it, who don't want to be in their lab and playing with the systems.
Yeah. So to answer your question, have an alternative.
Can you guys hear at the back? Question was, say it again, or-
Do all the incubators, accelerators ask for equity? The answer is no. Pledge doesn't. It's one of the things that distinguishes us. But yeah, we figure, especially if you're early entrepreneurs, but the experts work, it's very hard to.
So to answer your question, yes, just not everyone asks for equity. The CSRO's program doesn't, but that's also because, for two reasons. One, we work with things that aren't companies yet, so we work with pre-incorporation, and so it's nothing to take equity in. And also it just takes an objection off the table. So most accelerators and incubators will, some don't.
But to build on that question, I think one of the things that we're seeing is the cost of living in Australia is very expensive. People's money is invested in their homes, or just living is expensive. So in some ways, it's actually stifling the ability for people to say or save up enough to have that runway for 12, 18 months. So what is the advice, and what are the things that you're seeing that the cost of living in Australia is actually impacting the number of people who are coming through or are able to step out and say, I'm going to give this a go?
Yeah, really good question. I think one of the main things that we're seeing in relation to that, and not so much in our accelerator, but in some of the other accelerators, is that the people that are at the life stage who can sort of devote 3 months to an accelerator are people coming straight out of university who still live with their parents, don't have to fork out that, don't have children. It's one of the big barriers that we help people go through in our accelerator because they're often older. People have had a 20, 30-year career as a researcher. They have mortgages, they have children, and so part of our program is just helping them think through the financial implications of what's it going to take for me to be able to step out. Another thing that the CSRO does is we've now got a fairly generous leave without pay policy, so it lets people take up to 3 years off to go and try something, and if it doesn't work, you can come back to your job, and that's really, really important. So some other big Australian corporates have policies like that. It's definitely not a majority, but to the extent if you work for places like that, that's a really good way to take that risk, but not have to burn the bridge.
How many of you know about government grants? Do you guys know about, are you all connected where they are, where the money's coming from? Just a show of hands, like who's been a recipient of a grant from government? It's not me. So I don't know if there's an opportunity for you to want to go into some of the channels and avenues because that could also address that issue of I don't have any money, I can't do this for more than 3 months, otherwise I lose my home. You know, a bit of a dramatic example, but I don't know, just maybe some comments on government grants and what your thoughts are on how they're actually helping entrepreneurs get into business.
From our point of view, there isn't a we've been talking about in the innovation space for many years, there's not enough money in Australia, but actually there are, because there are so many different grants. It's a bit difficult to get them, and you have to put the time and the effort in to writing these applications. And there's, as we believe, it's if you can't write and present to a government agency what your business is, who your customers are going to be, those sorts of things, then you probably need to spend more time thinking about those things. So there's a number of grants, New South Wales state government grants that are, if you're eligible, you can get them, and then there are some competitive grants, especially accelerating commercialisation, but we can't go into all of the different grants. But and then as you get further down the line, the ASX would like you to believe it. Apparently there are overseas companies, including American companies, who are coming to the Australian market because of the ASX and all of the money we have in superannuation. I haven't taken a company public here, but
Soon.
yeah, we wish soon. We all wish soon.
No, you don't.
You
No,
don't
you
wanna
don't.
go-
You
you don't
don't.
wanna go soon.
I'm telling you that you don't.
Yeah.
Don't
Well,
wanna
one
go
of the things I
soon.
noticed coming back from Silicon Valley is that there's so much more money perhaps over there. The companies here are going public so early.
But
and then you've got all the reporting and
Yeah.
all that
Okay.
stuff.
Just.
Well,
Sorry.
you first.
Okay. I'm doing it that exactly at this moment. Okay. It's basically the IPO replaces a B round. Seriously, it's basically what should be a B round. It is easier to do an IPO.
Because there isn't the money here.
It's simply not the structure that they need. Basically, I can get, if I'm doing an IPO, I've got, for all practical purposes, infinite money coming. It's just, you're passive, don't give a rat's ass. The reality is, it should be coming in as a B round, or even at generous a C round, but it's quicker and cheaper for the IPO.
Because people want the liquidity?
Yep.
Yeah.
They just can't invest.
There's a big super funds are investing, is that what's...
No, they're not investing. No, they're not.
So why is the IPO easier?
Because it is for the rich enough, and that's what we're talking about, rich enough people coming in. But if you're talking about IFM or its equivalent, IFM is the investment bank owned by the super funds, institutional funds management. It controls about 400 billion odd, that kind of thing. It's not very much. The technical term is morons, and that's a generous version. The less generous version, I won't say in public, because it's very, very rude.
Have you thought of going public on the NASDAQ, going overseas?
Actually quicker. It's quicker on as a B as a OTC. I can do a BB OTC listing.
Sorry, just jargon.
Oh, forgive me. Sorry. An over-the-counter B listing, BB listing. It's only $300,000. And if you use what they call the Israeli model, where you actually set up the US company, then sell your Australian company to the US company, and then list, it's a relatively painless way to do it.
Are there any other questions from you guys regarding the accelerator journey and the incubator journey.
Yeah, we
you
got
all,
really
you all good on that?
Anyone playing IPO?
Yeah, right.
You might not be there quite yet, but are there other questions on those? We'll just keep
So just to clarify, with your definition of accelerator and the examples you quoted, most accelerators in practice would also be running their own fund.
It's a really good question. Most of them aren't, but there is a funder in Australia called Artesian, and what they've done is they've gone around all the Australian accelerators and incubators and essentially struck deals so that most of the accelerators in Australia that say, listen, come to our program, it'll be 10% equity and you get 50,000 seed funding. Most of those are underwritten by Artesian. The 50 grand comes from Artesian, they get 5% for their money. And then the incubator accelerator keeps 5% for themselves. And Artesian has probably invested in about 150 companies that way over the past couple of years. Indirectly. Most of the accelerators do not have their own funds.
How much was their follow funding for?
I'm not an expert on Artesian's business model, but I believe Artesian just looks to maintain their ownership percentage of 5% as a company scale, so they'll follow on to maintain, but they won't do the whole next round.
So how do you spell the Artesian?
Artesian. Artesian.
Thank you.
Any other questions before I go to my next one? This one's about diversity, and in particular, I think it goes back to my first question about the barriers to get into an incubator or an accelerator. You know, times you have to have an advanced business plan, you might have to have a prototype, you might have to have some business experience, but how are we bridging the gap for some of the lower socioeconomic population in Australia, the migrants, people with disabilities, refugees, and then I guess the next question too is around how do we support women in innovation as well? So I don't know what your thoughts are around the challenges we're facing in bringing in, some of the lowest socioeconomic people that potentially have great ideas but just don't have what some of us might have that have gone through university, for example, or to TAFE. And then also, what more do we need to do to help women in innovation? So I know it's two questions, but okay, I might start with you. And you can choose which one you want to answer, it's up to you.
For talking specifically about pledge, we don't have a lot of women because if I hear a female voice, I get excited. But that's really more to do with we're technology, and this is, David said, product focused, companies tend to be product focused. But we do have it's not a not-for-profit, but it's a profit recycling model, so we don't charge equity coming in, and we're doing a number of projects with the Cerebral Palsy Association. We're doing a number of projects that are for the disabled sector, and so as far as in general, I don't know. I know that Cicada seems to have a lot more women involved, and my experience coming back to Australia is you walk into a medtech function and it tends to be pretty much guys. That's just the nature of you need an engineering degree. I know more women are getting into engineering now in universities, so hopefully that'll carry through. Yeah.
Actually, biomedical engineers got one of the highest ratios of women.
Coming
both,
through the
both at Sydney and USW.
Do you think there's
50-50.
But there is a natural. Do you think there's a natural bias for investors when they're looking to invest in a company that's run by a male founder compared to a female founder? Is that a reality that you see, or is it something that depends on the investor?
Well, I haven't been in the taking companies far enough yet to see that, but I know that in our field in medtech, that if there is a great idea, a great business, and there's a female there, they would get preference. There's an organisation called Springboard that's female-only founders. They're out of the United States, but I know they've got a presence here. Topaz Conway's on the board. She's one of the accelerating commercialisation advisors. So there is a lot of, and I get invited to women in biotech, women in medtech. So I know there's a groundswell of getting more women involved in these organisations.
One's name is Springboard.
Springboard. I can tell you, I can give you some information afterwards.
David, your thoughts on that question?
So in relation to, I guess, all the groups that you mentioned in terms of that people who face disadvantage, I think that early stage technology and the early stage company space just amplifies the disadvantage that those groups face. Those groups all face an incredible amount of barriers just trying to participate in the normal economy. There's discrimination in access to jobs. So when you take a context that amplifies the risk and amplifies the uncertainty, I believe that also amplifies the bias against those groups. So that's definitely so. If you come from one of those backgrounds, you're going to find it harder to raise money. You're going to find it harder to get into an accelerator. There's a couple of exceptions. One is there is Springboard, which is a really good program. Another one is Blue Chili, runs a female-focused accelerator program called She Starts, which is really great. So there are some programs that are specifically focused on that. In relation to what we've done in the ON program, where we have a limited pool that we draw from, we target the people who are employed as publicly funded scientists and researchers. So to an extent there is a level of diversity in that, but one of the things where we're challenged diversity-wise is female participation. And so quite early on, we recognised that not only were not many of the applicants to our program female, they also faced some of their own challenges in the program in relation to what they were being asked to do and how they're being perceived. So what we do now is for everyone who's a female participant in our accelerator, we give them their own additional stream of coaching. So we invest more in them, and that's in relation to a number of areas. And we've also started what we call the Women Innovation Network, which is as we go around the country and run our program, we'll run companion events with a specific focus on women who are interested in early stage technology and create a space for them, designed for them. So it's not formally part of our accelerator program, but that's another thing. And also in our mentor network, really deliberately going out of our way to try and find great female mentors, and not just find them, but actually create them as well. There's a limited number of great mentors and mentor in a number of different programs. And so one of the things we've tried to do is be deliberate around building some really good female mentors in the space as well.
Okay, two things. Women on Boards are a really great organisation. I've been trying to get them to specifically big companies, listed ones. I've been trying to get them to actually target early stage because there are a truckload of women who have got really good skills that would really help the companies. And it's a really good way of actually starting their NED careers, their non-executive director careers. The other thing is the people you're talking about, the immigrants, whatever, they're much more likely to be self-employed. Much higher rate of self-employment, but they will not be looking for external money because they just don't know business. Right?
Great segue to disagree with you. We and Carol referred loosely to the incubators that were created in Israel on the back of 1 million Russian Jewish immigrants when Glasnost happened in the 80s. By the way, I'm Facebook living people. The worst situation we can have is an Uber driver from Eastern Europe who has a PhD in nuclear physics. So an organisation, there's one accelerator, incubator, not sure, called Catalyzer, spelt Catalysr, that targets refugees and quote-unquote boat people because they're just as interested. Yes, they're probably. It's known research that first generation in any country has more drive. You know, they're the ones that came in with a suitcase and they want to see their kids as doctors or lawyers or startup founders. So Catalyzer is one. I will put out just Scale Investors is another female investing that they don't aim to. I don't think they're an incubator, but they're a VC, venture capitalist, but they demand that at least one founder is a woman, otherwise they won't invest, period. Just running around the other, the other minorities, Indigenous as well. I don't. The one we presented here a meetup or two ago, Jocelyn King from First Australian Capital. So that's an attempt to bring together venture capital funds for Indigenous businesses, and there tends to be an aggregation around tourism tech and online hotels and whatever for the Indigenous people. And I did, Duncan and I were talking earlier, I'll just throw it out, it's a slightly old study. I'm sure it might have been replicated or updated, but Harvard did a study where they got a fake company, they prepared the pitch, method actors, same script, same intonation, same emotion as much as method actors can. One was a guy, one was a girl, range of venture capitalists, and the guy got more money, like 10 to 15% more on average. There is a bias, guys.
For disability tech, there's Remarkables.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Remarkables. Check it out.
Fantastic example of an accelerator pioneering.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
I think it's clear one of the things that, not that I'm in government, but government really should be amplifying and shouting the praises of all these great startups there. Because to be honest, I don't think we're doing enough of that. For us, we should be really celebrating, those types of startups and organizations that are making a real difference. So I think that's one of the challenges governments should do, and that's what I think the British do very well. And they keep talking about their companies and promoting. They create a big vibe, a huge marketing activity around their businesses, which I don't think we do enough of. So I think that's something that we should all think about, how we really amplify and promote the great companies that are here. It's really diverse across various sectors and also through the socioeconomic groups. So thank you for that. Are there any other questions before I keep going?
Which percentage of incubators are funded by government money? And which percentage were by
What's the difference, the mix in terms of incubators and accelerators funded by government and those funded by private sector?
So I don't exactly know the answer to that question. There's a whole bunch that have popped up in the last 12 to 24 months that are effectively underwritten by, I can't remember the name of the program, but it's 50/50 Incubator Support Fund, thank you. So, yeah, so most of the accelerators that are running now have some sort of government money that is subsidising operation. The exceptions will be where either corporate is underrunning, like HCF Catalyzer or Meridian, and there's probably only a couple I can think of that support themselves.
I'll throw out, it's slightly unrelated because it was a once-off hit, and John would have been awesome to talk to it, but the New South Wales government sent out 11 times $1 million to fund incubators. Basically every university got $1 million, and CSIRO got $1 million. I don't know if ANSTO did, but
It's called the Boosting Business Innovation Program.
that's the one.
We launched
And
that about
on the north,
2 years ago.
on the
we had
yeah.
1.5 million to 10.
On the North Shore, the 3 checks that went out were one to the ACU, Australian Catholic University, and the NSIN enjoys that space when they're not here. They're up the road in North Sydney. CSIRO Linfield, which is also the home of the On Connect program, part of the On program, and Pledge. And then the third one is the Macquarie University Incubator, which is an awesome building. It cost more than $1 million, guys, but it's well worth, if you're in the Macquarie area, drop in and see the Macquarie Uni
By the
Incubator.
way, the On Connect program is not just CSIRO and universities. It takes applications, takes companies from just the general community. That's the whole idea of the Linfield On Connect, is to bring in everybody, not just the unis.
So I had a question before was around that a lot of the incubators and accelerators seem to be based in the cities, and again, it could exclude people in the regions potentially. And I know from a government perspective, the regions are very important, and there's a lot of focus and attention in the regions. So if you're an entrepreneur in the regions, you probably have a better opportunity, to be honest, to access support from government now than you might have had in the past. That said, though, most incubators and accelerators are here in the city. I think we talked about it earlier around program-based type of accelerators and incubators that has a larger reach. compared to the ones that are here. Maybe your thoughts around how do we activate and how do we also reach out to the regions within Australia, and how does that then mix with what we're doing here in the metro cities around Australia?
Well, first off, the New South Wales Government Sydney Startup Summit, when if you haven't already been there, then go. It's, they've got a lot of good. You're quite right. It's much easier to get some New South Wales money if you're a regional player, or if you've got some sort of dealing with the region. We haven't pursued that at the moment yet. There's obvious things like agribusiness and things like that.
And then, David, maybe you could expand how you have a wider reach through your program and how you accessing people that might not be based here in North Sydney or.
Yeah. So I guess the first decision we made as a program when we were starting up was to not have a physical space. And so to this day, 4 years later, even though we've worked with 240 teams around Australia, we don't have a building. And instead what we do is we get people who to nominate to us that want to do our program and where they want to do it, and where there's critical mass of demand, we go to them and we run a program, and we have partnerships with most of the universities in Australia and a number of other places, and we use their infrastructure. Because all of the universities are in an arms race to try and have the best building, and most of them are empty, especially outside of semester. So we're really grateful to have those partnerships with universities, and we use their space. And so that's a very deliberate design decision we made to go where there's demand. So that's Darwin, Toowoomba. We run programs in Townsville, Newcastle, regional. People in Newcastle don't like me saying that. But that's one of the ways we're looking at that. I think for anyone here who's from a regional area, consider, your point about the living costs in capital cities. With respect to that, it's just if you can find ways to tap into support programs to do their accelerator in a city, like it's worth the journey, or even internationally. Because really the biggest problem those people are going to face is talent density. Like even if you are a great entrepreneur in a regional area, and you can tap into some sort of support, because like as your business grows, you're not going to be able to hire people in your region, give or take. Like the talent density, even in Sydney, it's a talent density problem. So I don't, so it's just I'd encourage people if they are geographically based in those areas and they want to have a startup, be thinking through what are the support they could be tapping into. They've also got to have a longer game plan about how can you build a scalable business from a regional area. The only one that's been super successful that I'm aware of is a company called Safety Culture, which I believe is headquartered out of Townsville. They have several hundred people. They have customers all over the world, and they now, they've scaled their team and business quite well. I think they've raised $30 or $60 million or something. But it can be done. But you've got to think about that talent part of the equation. I think is the biggest thing to worry about if you're in a regional area.
Anything else, Al? I've got another question I'll ask. So when I was working, obviously, with the Department of Industry, and I was talking with a lot of businesses around New South Wales, the key thing that I kept telling them when they are thinking about either starting up or scaling up is that if you don't start with an export orientation in mind, you're not going to make it. So I just want to, hopefully through your discussion with our audience here, that you could really reinforce the importance of thinking about export on any business that you want to start, because the local market's just not big enough.
We're in the round-off era. Someone said to me when I first got back from the States that the Australian market is the round-off era. So if you put too much effort into succeeding here, where you know the system and you know the people, then you're going to miss the overseas markets. And my bias, probably because I spent so long in the United States, is the US is, yes, it's a big scary market, but it's if you go to Europe, you've got all those different countries you've got to accommodate. It's somewhat easier if you've got a decent product that people want, because there'll be any number of distributors who'll say, yeah, I'll take Italy, I'll take France. In the US, you have to actually commit. So, at least in your IP, if you're going to have IP, make sure it's valid in the US. And if you're planning to go to TGA, well, maybe think of FDA as well. So that's my take. Is you can't. Australia's a fabulous place and wonderful and great lifestyle, but you're not going to make your fortune here.
Sorry, Carol, if you're going to go to TGA, get an FDA.
An FDA.
Do you want to just explain?
Oh, I'm sorry. therapeutic goods. These are the regulatory agencies in medical field. The Food and Drug Administration is the US one, and the Therapeutic Goods Administration is the Australian one. So Mike's an expert in. One of our mentors here is an expert in the regulatory reimbursement, but it's an important thing to. You probably should go with a local market. I say to people, try your product here, because if you fail in Australia, nobody else will know about it. So that's right. So Americans they're not that scary. They're not that different from Australians. Yeah. So Food and Drug Administration, TGA, and I'll shut up now, right?
Oh.
Yeah, it's definitely got to be global from day one. There's no point trying to build a scalable business or a large business if you just see Australia as your market. Can be a good place to start. And again, the topic's about accelerators and incubators. So if you're considering an accelerator or incubator, ask questions up front about how can you help me tap into global markets. If everyone likes to advertise the mentors in their program, ask questions like, how much time will I get with this mentor one-on-one? Because some of them might say, everyone gets an hour across the whole program. It's not going to get you very far. So yes, being global is important. The other thing that people might be surprised about is, if you're thinking about having a scalable business, overseas investors will give you very little credit for revenue out of Australia. Especially American VCs. The irony is there's this perception that Australia is quite nepotistic when it comes to the market, and so they'll just say, you probably knew someone who knew someone, and that's why you got that contract, so we don't believe that you have a reputable business overseas. The reality is it's harder to make money in Australia versus the US. The US is a lot more nepotistic when it comes to that, but something that people don't think a lot about. They think, I'll get to 100,000 annual recurring revenue or $1 million, and then I'll go overseas and I'll be able to raise. A lot of people are then surprised that they don't get a lot of credit for Australian or domestic revenue when you're trying to raise international money.
Question, yeah.
Carol, one of the comments that you made was, kind of test out the Australian market, no one will notice, and then take it to the US. What are your thoughts on Australia being sort of like a trend follower of the US, for example? So then, say you've got your product out to market here in Australia, it doesn't necessarily work, because if we are kind of trend followers, should we take it to the US or take it to Europe first?
I'll just repeat the question.
Yeah, so the question essentially is, Australians follow the rest of the world. I don't necessarily agree with that premise, but then if that's the case, then should we not take it to the world before we launch here? And I think it depends on your business, and David was saying, all of their companies are encouraged to be born global. If I was starting, or I am involved in a couple of companies, I want to go check out the US market. I want to find out what the regulatory system is, and the regulatory difficulty of regulatory, who's going to pay for it. And the US on the medical side is a bit of a basket case at the moment. But I wouldn't necessarily take it there first. But you want any businessman, any VC worth his salt would want to see what your international plans are. So sure, let's use Australia as a test market, but make sure you've done a few trips around the world.
Yeah, I'd like to reinforce that. Don't underestimate Australia as a test market. Australian consumers, more so than Australian business, but Australian consumers are much more willing to adopt technology sooner. For anyone in fintech, the US payment system is years, decades behind Australia. Still don't use PayWave. You've got to sign.
You've got to sign a credit card.
So Australian business a little less so, but Australia is a good place to try products. A lot of the especially for consumer goods, a lot of the multinational food companies do their first global releases in areas like Newcastle, because it is a fairly representative place of kind of Western type preferences, and people are far more likely to adopt new things in Australia. So not a bad place to do early release testing, especially with consumer.
Don't build your company around it.
I think we've got a few more minutes. John, at 5, or are we?
Yeah.
I want to see if there's any other questions from you guys. I have one more question, then we might just have final thoughts from the panels, and then we'll hand over to John. What we're seeing in industry through digital disruption, automation, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, augmented reality, and of course Internet of Things, is that the typical horizontals of industry, I'm a cybersecurity person, I'm advanced manufacturing, I'm a creative industries, I'm a medtech, that's all being broken down and everything's very horizontal. Do you feel, and are you seeing that a lot of these entrepreneurs understand that potentially, for example, technology in defense industries can be used in agriculture, so the sensors and so on, and the drones, they can be used in ag tech or they can be used in the mining sector. Do you see the entrepreneurs are connecting the dots that there is further applications of their technology and ideas into other traditional sectors? Or should they really just maintain the razor focus or the sharpness on just focusing on one market and understanding the customer rather than trying to be too broad? It's almost two questions in one. But
So I work with two biosensor companies in Silicon Valley, and they had great technology, but one of our biggest problems, and I've got a client here now, a company I'm working with, that they can be all things to all people. And you can't be all things to all people. You really do have to have you have to do your research and find out what the different opportunities are. But if you don't have a laser focus, if you don't decide on a customer and really help that segment, then in my opinion, you're not going to succeed. Mike's been talking to me for years to go out and find out what the problems are in hospitals and with doctors, and then give them the technology to solve those problems rather than solve the technology.
Just to address your question, there is a lot of transfer of knowledge and technology between fields, and that's really where innovation comes from. The really truly innovative people see the opportunity, and the entrepreneurs see the opportunity. I remember distinctly in my earlier days in my career, an infusion pump for insulin for diabetics came out of the space program, where they had to minimize delivery of small volume of liquids, etc., on the spaceship. And there's a whole lot of examples. You take a plumber who comes with your jet blaster and does the cardiologists do the same sort of thing, just a little bit different than a smaller scale. If you need to realign your waste plumbing, you put in a stent basically. That's what they do today, and you do that in a cardiologist. So people who look at other spaces and other areas and say, well, how do I miniaturize this, or vice versa, is a phenomenal opportunity.
But as a company, as a startup, you can't do everything for everybody.
No, I think the learning curve.
Yeah.
Can I just throw back? Sorry to jump backwards to a topic, but I do have to. We are getting a Facebook Live comment that disses this meeting a bit regarding going global and Europe. We've talked Europe, we've talked US. They said, Jono, a white markets event. Southeast Asia, India, China, and Japan ignored.
Totally agree.
Comments?
For health because you need to understand first the culture. And usually Western countries want to
So
align
is-
the culture to everything.
Is it a cultural problem to
Yes,
go global
it is.
in our neighbourhood?
But, there's a lot of support, right? So like we just had the Asian Summit here this year, right? So we had all the leaders of the Asian countries here in Australia talking about trade opportunities. So it's definitely higher on the agenda. There's definitely easier pathways. It is a bit harder if you go into those markets that you might have a wider difference in culture and how do you do business, and you just have to be a bit more aware and cautious around understanding the market, understanding the cultural nuances, and then who you partner with. But from our perspective, when I was in government, was that it is a huge opportunity, Asia, for sure. The population, the growing middle class. I mean, I think you guys know all this, that take China as an example, like more than 500 million people have come out of poverty, and there's still another 400 or 500 million that are going to come up the scale. So it's one that you can't ignore, in particular where our geography is. It's too important. So I don't think that was the case that we don't want to talk about. That I think was more to Carol's point. I'm not putting words in your mouth, but it may be easier to go to markets that are a little bit more easier to do business with if you're a startup. But if you discount Asia, then you're in serious trouble. So
The problem Australia's had marketing worldwide has been because we're not like we're not Switzerland. We're not in the middle of the whole market. now we're moving towards it, but you can't go into China alone. You have to have a partner. We sold into Japan, but we had, with the laser company I was with, but we had a very strong Japanese presence, partner there, because we couldn't go ourselves. And India is another one that's huge. The two major markets, China and India. India actually is easier for Australia or for the US to tackle than China. And they speak the language. And
I think language is a big factor. Even I see the other side, people coming to Australia from the US or from Canada, and they say we want to go first to an English-speaking country because we don't have to translate everything.
Right.
So these are factors. If you bootstrap a startup, you can't necessarily afford the cost to tackle all of those problems.
Well, we might wrap up. Maybe some closing comments for you, David, and then you, Carol, and then we'll hand over back to you, John.
Probably closing comment would be around if you're considering doing an accelerator or an incubator program, really encourage you to ask who's funding this program, why are they funding it, what are their goals, what are their incentives, does that align with what you're trying to achieve, and then why are you doing that program? Are you trying to get from a defined A to B really quickly? Do you just need some general hand-holding and help, and you're not quite sure what you'll need when you'll need it, but you need some people who've maybe walked that road before that you can go to for advice, and then understand that everything's negotiable. Never take someone's first offer.
Sure.
I've made the point through the evening, but put the customer at the middle of whatever you do. As far as choosing, I agree with what David said. Choosing accelerators, incubators. Maybe in accelerators it's hard to get into, but I think that there's plenty of capacity out there for people who want to help with the company. So do your homework.
And maybe to finish off, David, to put you on the spot, having left government, if you could have waved a magic wand and changed one thing, or to help the accelerator, incubator, the global the startup encouragement part of your job?
I think I would have probably done two things. If I had a wand that could give me two wishes, or a genie that had three, I could get three. I think the one would be around the promotion and advocacy. There should be three things. Would it be promotion and advocacy of how good our tech is, how good our companies are here in Australia, that we're leading the world, we're not actually the followers. We are a thriving ecosystem of startups, we've got a lot of venture capital. So I think we don't do enough to promote ourselves. I don't know if it's the Australian tall poppy syndrome, but I think we need to do more like Boris did in the UK around fintech, right? They built up a whole industry where if you go and visit them, well, actually we're probably even better than they are. But we just don't promote it enough. So I think government should do more of that. I think government should also spend more time with industry to understand what the real issues are, rather than government talking to government, talking to government, talking to government, talking to government. And then I think the other one is government as a procurer. I think it's important as well, like if we can really get government to help companies in Australia get that first job, I think, because that also holds credibility when you go over abroad and you start to say to the international market, oh, by the way, New South Wales government, Australian government, Victoria government, they purchase my service or products. There really is those people say, great, it must be proven, because if government likes it, it's got to be a credible entity. So that's probably be my three. There's a longer list, but look, I think they're trying. I mean, you can see the startup hub, but those would be my things I would recommend to government to really focus on.
Awesome. A quick round of applause.